Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden, and I'm in the virtual studio this week with Caitlin Flanagan, coming to us from Los Angeles, from her bedroom. You were in your bedroom last time. Are you still?
Yes.
This looks like a different corner of your house. Is this still your bedroom?
Yes, I've been turning the camera around so it would look as though I had a variety of places in my house.
Before we actually saw your
pandemic. I know.
Well, we have an amazing guest on today, and one of the reasons you're on as well, aside from the fact you're always like one of the best guests, is you're obsessed with her. This is Susanna Moore, the author of a new memoir called Miss Aluminum, which is about, it's really once upon a time in Hollywood, what it was really like in the 60s and 70s. And she's like a zealot character. She just happens to be in the center of things through it, which we'll talk to her about. And you were obsessed with her.
I was obsessed with her. I am. In fact, I am obsessed with her, even more so now that I've read the book. She had been known to write these, she grew up in Hawaii. She wrote these lovely novels about that experience. And so she was sort of, in a certain niche. Michiko Kukutani had said that her prose was, I wrote it down, it was such a great compliment, precisely immaculate prose. So she was really respected, but she was just kind of a woman's novelist, kind of like really good on clothes and really good on settings and really good on precise details, all of which I'm interested in. But then comes in the cut, and I think it was maybe 96 or something. It's a very tightly plotted, very short, extremely erotic, not obscene, but erotic, and extremely frightening, threatening situation with an incredible ending. And it just blew the back of my head off.
So it's like a thriller? Because I had actually, you told me about this book, and I ordered it in order to have read it before she came on. And then, of course, it hasn't been delivered yet. So I'll be very excited to read it. But it's completely different from her other novels. And
completely
like a crime.
Different.
Yeah.
It's about crime. It's about a particular crime. It's about a particular woman. In a way, it's sort of a 90s update of a novel looking for Miss Goodbar in the 70s. It was a big novel about one night stands and the dangers that one night, people were very worried at that time, moral panic, women having one night stand, what kind of danger could that involve? And so this is about a woman whose sexual appetite is for that kind of sex, but she doesn't want to have any relationship. She just wants to be on her own. She's a writer, she's a reader. And it becomes, the sex kind of gets you. You're like, wow, I wasn't expecting that in this kind of book. And then the nature of the threat and the nature of the malevolence.
Okay. So this is
the misdirection. It is just an incredible book.
Okay. So this is definite summer reading post Miss Aluminum, her memoir, which is also its own wonderful thing. But before we bring on Susanna, you're in LA, obviously, and we're talking again not just during a pandemic, but as riots are going on amongst us. And you said they're happening right near you. What is going on?
I have very, very bad or good luck when it comes to really bad or really serious uprisings, starting from, as a child, an American, but I was in a Catholic section of Derry when I was 10 and my family got caught in a really bad situation in a Catholic section against the British Army. And then in 92 riots in LA, I was very close to those geographically. And now I am about 4 houses from the site of the biggest looting that happened last night.
Oh my!
And it was very, very, there was a car parked right in front of the house, and 3 guys jumped out with backpacks to go and take part. And And then they didn't come back, and we thought maybe those guys got arrested. But then my son saw about 3 hours later a U-Haul came packed with stuff, and one of the people in the U-Haul jumped out and drove away in that car. But it was very interesting last night because my kids were sort of rattled, and they were asking me why I wasn't more rattled. And I said, oh, because I remember in 92, once they instituted a curfew and once the National Guard came, everything just stopped on a dime. And all night there was no police presence, you know,
Wow.
and everyone was showing the, you know, that things were going up, being burned and being looted. And it was interesting because in 92, Daryl Gates, who was the terrible chief of police, he purposely on the first night of the unrest did not let the cops deal with it, because he sort of wanted to show in his kind of malevolent way, oh, you don't want cops around? Okay, no cops, and your neighborhoods are going to be burned. And so here, I don't think it was a strategy. I think the cops did get overwhelmed and they couldn't get to, which is weird because this was really the epicenter was Melrose, just of the looting last night.
Wow.
They just didn't come. In fact, they never came. They never came.
Were you huddled in
And-
your house like pioneers with, you know, eyeing the gun over the fireplace? What's going to happen? Were you worried?
There was a moment, you know, when you heard, there was just a moment when you were hearing the riot or this whole situation on television, and you realized it was louder coming through your window.
Wow.
But it wasn't anything with, you know, houses, you know, it was really to go to these high-end stores. And what was really different, as everybody's saying, but we saw it firsthand, was that there absolutely was a very legitimate, significant Black Lives Matter organized marches going on. And then something else was going on. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't organic. And it was just down here, a couple of, like half a mile away, there was a video that was very interesting. An African-American woman was telling these two young white women who were totally kind of covered up, stop writing that. It was on the edge of a Starbucks at Farmer's Market.
Right.
And they were writing all these BLM slogans. And she said, we're going to get blamed for this.
Right.
You know, you white people aren't going to get blamed. You're using our slogans. Please stop. And the women wouldn't stop. So I don't know what was going on.
As you were experiencing that much closer to you, of course, I'm in DC, and, you know, the people trying to scale the fences of the White House seem to be a little more orderly here, except for those types of incidences. But one of the sad things just in our household, I mean, we heard sirens going downtown. A friend of mine drove over to visit, socially distanced, of course, out in the yard. And she said on her way here, she passed like 8 police cars and one of these like armored cars. Don't know what you call them, but, you know, a serious military vehicle, all heading.
A Humvee.
Maybe something like that. But anyway, all headed downtown. In the midst of this, we were decorating our house for our youngest daughter's virtual graduation parade, which was all being planned. And it's been a little surreal that as I'm sort of tying balloons on the front of the house, because she and her, 8 of her friends are going to get in there, decorate their cars and drive around.
Right.
In addition to the pandemic.
That's the thing is this was the weekend because all our big parks have been closed. And It was like, oh, Griffith Park's going to be open again. We can go hiking this weekend. Immediately that's closed again. I just remember there was a famous Time magazine. I tried to tell the boys about this, that everything that you feel in your lifetime that's terrible, there's always been something much more terrible in the past. So don't feel uniquely chosen. But there was a famous Time magazine cover called LA Hell, where it was like, we had the riot, we had the earthquake, and we had these really serious fires all in about 18 months time or a year's time. So this is just another time of just confluence.
Actually, you mentioned your two boys, your two college boys who are class of 2020 college, and my daughter class of 2020 high school. You wrote, and you're living history around you, and you wrote this wonderful article last month, headline of which was, "You thought you were free, but history found you." What a history lesson our poor class of 2020s are having. And as you say, many more people have been suffering terrible, terrible things, but this is a loss. But you were very inspirational to you imagined, I guess, a commencement address to this class, to your sons. What can they look for hope in this? What is your message to them as this world explodes around them in every way?
That they are needed. You know, all these kids graduating, whether it's high school, whether it's college, it's a big deal to graduate from either of those. It's so easy. I dropped out of high school, but I did eventually get back in. But it's very easy to drop out of high school. It's very easy to get some credits of college under your belt and then realize that the money ran out, or that you chose a major that you didn't know you had to take statistics in or something, and you drop out. These are the kids, the young people who stayed in, they got it done, they submitted their work, and they are brilliant in all sorts of fields that we old people don't know anything about. And, you know, they are, fortunately or unfortunately, it's kind of a ask what your nation needs of you, because we do need a lot from them. And so it's not kind of a false rah-rah, here's your mortar board, and here's your,
right.
Oh, the mortar board. Yeah, here's your mortar board, and here's your degree, and here's your entry ramp to some callow, consulting job. No, we need you, whatever you have, you know, whether it's philosophy, whether it's English, whether it's engineering, whether it's poli-sci, whether it's a high school diploma, that we really need you. Things aren't good right now, but you, the young, educated Americans, that's what's always gotten us out of every pickle before. No, it wasn't Nixon who ended the war. It was these young people who ended the war. So,
right. You talked about your dad, Pearl Harbor happening when he was in college.
Yeah, he was a freshman. My father was a profound intellectual, and it was his freshman year of college, and he loved it was Amherst College, and he was finally away from this oppressive Irish Catholicism. He was an atheist, and he just couldn't stand that. And he finally got to some, intellectual freedom and a place where the thing he was good at, which is writing and reading, were highly valued. And then that December, Pearl Harbor was bombed. I mean, a lot of people knew that America was going to be getting into the war, but they didn't know it'd be that way.
Right.
And everybody, all the young men who hadn't already enlisted, some had, the next morning, which was Monday, they all walked into the town of Amherst from campus, and they chose a branch of the service to sign up for, which I think is such an incredible moment for a novel or something, that kind of on a whim, let's sign up over this one. Yeah. And maybe that was the decision that got them killed and their friends survived the war. These consequential decisions made by teenagers. And then, my effete father, who never learned to drive a car and loved the ballet and was that kind of a guy, he was a gunner in the Pacific.
Wow.
And anyway,
he joined the Navy.
He never talked about it. He joined the Navy. I said, why did you choose that? He said, I thought it would be cleaner. And I was like, well, that makes sense. It was my dad all over. But one of the last kind of conversations I had with my father, I was thinking about that day that they'd gone in and signed up to fight in World War II on that Monday after Pearl Harbor. And I said, hey, Dad, when you did that, what'd you do next? What'd you do afterwards? And he just looked at me in bewildered, and he said, went to class. Mm-hmm. Like, you signed up for a war that might well kill you, but it's Monday and you got romantic poetry and you need to get there. That's what I've seen from cancer. I've had cancer for 17 years. There's so much strength in us that we rarely are called upon to use. And it's just in there within us. And it's a time, there's nothing in life like feeling needed. That to me is the whole secret to life, is that if someone needs you, you feel like you're a valuable contributor and you can't just fade away. You need to be in the front line. So I think that they can think about the ways that generations before kept standing up to make it better in America. And it's their turn now. And, you know, they're gonna redesign things now. They've come out of Trump and pandemics, and now this unrest, you know, it's tough, but I have every confidence in them.
I printed out your essay and I gave it to B to read.
Oh,
it definitely helped, but yes, it's a strange moment. Well, let's now lose ourselves and go back to Hollywood in the 60s and 70s. And hang out with Susanna for a bit. And Caitlin, just before we go to Susanna, let's take a quick pause for our sponsor for this week's program. Well, as Caitlin said, we're living through difficult and historic times, and even doing simple things like getting groceries and eating healthy is hard. I mean, people make jokes about the quarantine 15, but it's real. But you can stay healthy, focused, and energized with fresh, delicious meals that are delivered straight to your door from Sakara. Sakara is a nutrition company that believes wellness begins with what you eat. Their signature nutrition program brings the transformational power of plant nutrition to your home in the form of fresh, plant-rich, ready-to-eat meals. Made with organic ingredients and powerful superfoods, each meal is expertly designed to boost immunity, improve energy, support gut health and digestion, and get your skin glowing. From hearty salads and nutrient-dense granolas to savory flatbreads and seasonal fruit parfaits, their ever-changing menu of creative, chef-crafted meals makes clean eating delicious and so easy. All of Sakara's meals are 100% plant-based, gluten-free, dairy-free, and non-GMO. And in addition to their delicious meals, Sakara also offers daily essentials like supplements and herbal teas to complete your wellness routine and support overall health and vitality. And to boost your immunity, which is something we all need right now, try their best-selling daily probiotic blend or detox water drops with pure chlorophyll. And right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their order when they go to sakara.com/femsplain. Or you can enter code FEMSPLAIN at checkout. That's Sakara, sakara.com/femsplain to get 20% off your order. Sakara.com/femsplain. Susanna, welcome to the Femsplainers.
Well, thank you.
You're coming to us from New York, is that right?
I'm in Martha's Vineyard. I stayed here a few days longer to be with my daughter and two small grandchildren.
So Caitlin and I were talking about the book before you joined us, and we're just gripped by it. Caitlin is in Los Angeles, and you grew up in California, Caitlin. You grew up in LA, correct?
I grew up in Berkeley, and then I moved to LA when I was grown, and had a much less interesting Los Angeles experience than you did, Susanna, I'm embarrassed to say.
Well, I think mine was, excuse me, it was, you know, since writing the book and since having to talk about it, I realized how much of my life was what is now called reactive. So it's not as if I went to Los Angeles to have this wonderful life or a career or to be an actress. It was the last thing I wanted because I knew I wasn't very good at it. But it was a concatenation of odd circumstances, mostly meeting Connie Wald, who then led me into this world that I would not have found otherwise.
Well, let's set this up a little bit. So you grew up in Hawaii, but you left at 17. Your mother died when you were 10?
12.
12. And then your father remarried to a Disney level classic evil stepmother, it sounds like. And you were like one of 5 children, but you had this somewhat carefree childhood, if one can even call it that. It's sort of cliche. But then this trauma, this terrible trauma happened to you. And then you left and you went to Philadelphia and you lived with your grandmother and aunt. And then somehow you were obviously a very beautiful young woman and you just found yourself first in New York and then in LA. So tell us a little bit about that journey.
I think because of my mother's death and because I had adored her and been close to her, I did, and for the rest of my life, find other mothers. And the first of them was someone called Allie Kaiser, who was the wife of the industrialist Henry Kaiser, who happened to live next door to us in Honolulu. And she had always been kind to me, and I was friends with her son, with whom I went to school. But when my mother died, she took a particular interest in me. And so when I went to Philadelphia to be with my grandmother, really sent away by my father and my stepmother to get rid of me, she then sent me quite impractically, because I took nothing with me when I left. I wanted nothing of what my stepmother had given me, and I had very little. She sent me 4 trunks of her hand-me-downs, which happened to be these exquisite clothes and shoes, mostly made by an American designer called Norman Norell. Much too old for me, much too grand, very austere, very beautiful clothes. And then she arranged for me to have a meeting with Walter Annenberg, who was the publisher of the Philadelphia Inquirer, because I had told her once that I wanted to be a journalist. And so a lot of it was, as my first maternal figure, she played a very important part. And then later, it was she who sent me to Bergdorf's, where I worked as a salesgirl.
There was one moment before Bergdorf that, it's such a moment in the book when, I don't know, you've been invited to a cotillion or some sort of fancy dress party, and your grandmother made this exquisite dress. And there was even this moment when she took the white kid gloves and dipped them in water with glycerin just so they would have the correct sheen. And you got to this event and you were totally overdressed. And it was just, to me, such a chilling moment to think of this act of love that your grandmother had labored over so that you would absolutely keep up with this crowd. And I just thought that was one of those moments in women's lives that I just thought is just so poignant.
And it was also generational, because she, first of all, she knew about things like glycerin and how to make evening coats and ball gowns, because she had been lady's maid to a woman who lived in Chestnut Hill in Philadelphia. But she had done the same thing for my mother, which is how my mother caught the attention of my father, who was from quite a different social class and would not have taken up with my mother had he not thought she was someone much grander than she was, given her clothes, which my grandmother had made for her or been given by her, the woman she worked for. So there was no reason that my grandmother wouldn't believe that she could do the same thing with me. But it was 1963, and as I say in the book, girls didn't even wear bras. So I was too naive. I didn't know. I'd never been invited to it was called the Bachelor's Ball, and it was a Philadelphia tradition. But the girls were, barefoot in what I thought were ugly Laura Ashley print dresses, but all of them very carefree, loose hair. Mine was, of course, in a tight chignon. no one was wearing gloves. No one was wearing not only not shoes or a bra, but no one was in a floor-length evening coat. It was a very important lesson for me too, which was always to underdress, just to err on that side, and also to try to be clear about what you were getting into. Try to it's not so much not be so naive, but find out what the bachelor's ball was. And also, I had an inkling of it, but I didn't want to stand up to my grandmother, who I adored, and to whom it meant so much that I was being accepted, as she thought, into Philadelphia society.
You mentioned
the opposite happened.
You mentioned, was it Walter Annenberg or the?
Yes.
So having had this, you've just been thrown in this world, as you mentioned. You left at Hawaii at 17 with nothing, with no money, no clothes. They really packed you off. They didn't even pack you off. They sent you off with nothing.
Yes.
But so then you walk into the Philadelphia Inquirer to try, as boldly as you may have gone to the bachelor's ball, you walk into the Inquirer office to meet with him, Mr. Annenberg.
Yes, and again, a little naive, I realized that I wouldn't be there if it weren't for Mrs. Kaiser, but again, it was reactive. It's not as if I saw an advertisement that the Philadelphia Inquirer was looking for reporters or journalists, and it's not as if it was my idea. But I went in. Again, I was wearing one of Mrs. Kaiser's dresses. I was, I was naive. I said to Mr. Annenberg, he said, "Well, what can I do for you?" He was completely bored. He was there only because the Kaisers had asked him. And I said, "Oh, well, I would like to be a reporter." With not much consideration of what, I hadn't been to college. I was 17. So he said, looking at his watch, "Oh, fine, kid, come back Monday. You have a job." And when I returned Monday morning, the job was as a classified ad taker in a room full of older, unionized, not particularly friendly women. To the 17-year-old girl in a fancy dress coming in that had been, just dropped there by Mr. Annenberg, which they must have known.
They probably thought you were his mistress or something.
Yeah.
And then, but then you left there. And before we go to Hollywood, you just had your stories of working in Bergdorf Goodman finally made sense to me from the old movies. I've been watching, of course, in quarantine, a lot of old movies, and how fancy women used to shop. They would go to these stores and girls would parade clothes by them. You wouldn't just go through racks or wander. It seemed so glamorous. But it was also treacherous, and you worked there.
It was also very snooty because it was a way of maintaining its exclusivity. It was the most expensive and the best department store. Not even a department store, because it just sold women's clothes and accessories. And it was famous amongst, again, a certain class. And when you walked in, there were no clothes on racks. You didn't push hangers aside to see what you wanted. You were approached by a rather intimidating older saleswoman, always in black, who would peremptorily demand to know what you wanted. It was quite intimidating. Excuse me. But I was sent to the top floor where there was a little boutique, tiny, barely, the size of a bedroom, maybe, small bedroom, that was adjacent to the beauty salon. And there were 4 or 5 girls and another mother figure called Mary Douglas. And we did what is now called personal shopping for the women who were in the beauty salon. And so I was able to roam through the entire store, which of course I loved. And so someone would say, "Oh, I need 6 pairs of stockings," or "I need a bathing suit, or I need 4 cashmere sweaters in these colors. Can you get them? And so I would go on my rounds. I loved it.
You know, that section of the imperious saleswomen at those level of stores, and this is a big step down to be Altman, but still, I remember when I was going to my prom, I was in New York for this fluky thing. I'm from California, but somebody told me the place to go was 1979, that I should go to the Altman's, and there I could get a prom dress. And I remember sort of finding the place that there would be these kind of dresses, and the saleswoman sort of looking at me and saying, you know, you need to go to upstairs where it was all of these sort of remnant things or last chance sale items. And it was just like, you know, I just wasn't deemed the sort of person, you know, I was young, but it was just, no, we don't need you on this floor with your prom dress.
It was very strict, all of that. It's changed, of course, now, as it should have and would, you know, eventually. But I say, too, in the book, it was one of my early, very clear lessons in class distinction. Mm-hmm. Working behind the scenes, too, because a lot of the women who worked there and men were Cuban refugees, and who had, according to them, better lives. They weren't salespersons. But Mr. Goodman's wife had been a Cuban, so it was known that if you could get to Bergdorf's, you would get a job.
I was just noticing that when you were describing that there's that sort of, I don't know, I think maybe this exists at really high-end hotels or something, but this very careful pecking order among people who work for the very wealthy, and that the customer should behave a certain way and that they should be paid certain respect within, you know, it's just a very, very, very clear society within that one department store.
Yes, very much so. A metaphor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you went from there. You had a brief first youthful marriage, but it took you into modeling and the incident that forms the title of your book, Miss Aluminum.
And Mrs. Kaiser.
And again, but I was interested that you chose that incident or that moment in your life to be the title of your book.
You know, I didn't choose it, and I couldn't find a title for a long time. And it's a tricky book to have. You know, you don't want to say my life or my 10 years in Hollywood, and I'm superstitious about titles. I always think if you don't have one right away, it's not a good sign. But my editor, Jonathan Galassi, read it for the first time and said, "Oh well, of course it's called Miss Aluminum." And he also chose the cover, which both of which surprised me. And I saw that he was right, that it was humorous, self-deprecating, again, a metaphor, because a lot of my, you know, aluminum it's not quite tinfoil, but it's not steel either. It's not an inferior metal, but it's a what's the word when it's an
alloy, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And so I thought, and it's used for shaping other things, but it's not strong enough. You don't have aluminum houses. And I thought, yeah, that's a very good title. I was a Miss Aluminum in that sense. Although my actual reign as Miss Aluminum was only a week.
Well, explain briefly what that was. But this was part of your, I mean, obviously, and this led you into modeling, but in that whole sort of below the supermodel, just that kind of world of the 60s where you'd go to car shows and just stand there like a pageant contestant.
And also, the cover was taken for an advertisement for Max Factor, and for a while, a year maybe, I was the face of Max Factor. And of course, you were not given a contract, or you didn't even use Max Factor makeup. or have anyone make you up. You just showed up. And I think you just got your average, your normal hourly fee, which was not very much, maybe $50 or something. So it was all on the lowest would have been, say, catalog models. That was considered not. So again, we're back on the scale of social distinction in class. That was not considered very special. But to be doing photographs, and then even within that, to be doing editorial was the height of success, which is, the commercial pages of, not the ad pages, say, of Vogue or other fashion, the editorial pages. That was considered what you wanted.
And you were part of that. And then you got befriended by Oleg Cassini, who was, of course, such a big deal back then. He dressed Jackie Kennedy. I, by the way, met him when I was 18, I think, when he came to Toronto. And my mother took me to an event, some press event where he was. And I was wearing some dress I had literally just bought at a very crummy store nearby because I didn't know what to wear. But anyway, it was a figure-hugging dress, such as it was. And he was very creepy. He really paid me, I thought, I was, of course, very flattered at the time. I thought, oh, my God, this designer has noticed me. And he was, in retrospect, and then after I read about him in your book, a little too attentive, probably. But you had, just a horrific, what we would now call a Harvey Weinstein incident with him.
Yes, and of course, as happened then, probably much more than now, although still happens now, I blame myself.
Why? Okay, so that goes totally against the politics of today.
Yes, although there was an article in the New York Times or the Washington Post, I'm not sure, maybe 2 months ago, in which it wrote about a survey that had been taken in colleges, Yale, Dartmouth, all kinds of colleges. And the result was that 60% of respondents said that they would not report a rape or a sexual assault. And I was very shocked by that. That was a few months ago, 60%, more than half. So at least we have the 40% who would, which we may not have had when it happened to me, but it never, I knew that to go to the police because he was famous and because he was rich and because he would fight it, that I didn't have a chance. He would just say I was lying or, try to entrap him, or who knows what he would say. He would say it never happened.
But you said, he really burst in on you.
So I was just saying what was most sort of insidious about it was that afterwards, he sort of then did go and help you to further your career. And it was sort of a sense that, yes, you've done this thing, and then I will, show up and give you, some more work or something afterwards.
No,
he was sort of friendly.
I don't think it was compensatory. I think what happened was, although I'm not sure, he needed 10 girls and he only had 9. But again, in the book, it didn't matter if he only had 9. Nothing, none of the play girls even had a line of dialogue, I don't think. So it didn't signify. Why did he ask me? Did he feel...
This is for a movie specified that after he raped you in a hotel room, he then, as Caitlin says, he then calls you and he's doing the costumes for a movie.
Yes, and terrible movie, a kitsch cult film now. It turns out people do know about it. One of the series of the Matt Helm books with Dean Martin, really a silly movie. But he was doing the costumes, and there had been a publicity campaign in which he would go around the world with his clothes and pick the girls who could be the sleigh girls who were Dean Martin's bodyguard, and in the most preposterous costumes you ever saw. So I this happened maybe a few months after the rape in the hotel, and it had a lot to do with getting away from my first husband. It had to do with my having no money, and I had rationalized it somehow so that I could do it and not be find a way not to be compromised. And I did manage to do that. I mean, I don't think I ever spoke to him. Maybe in a cursory way, I'd have to say good morning or hello, but I was never alone.
How much did the trauma of that rape go on to affect you? I know that prime trauma was what happened with your mother, but did the rape also layer in another layer of trauma?
You know, as I said, the trauma was internalized. I mean, in other words, the blame. I thought what he did was horrible, of course, evil, but I really blamed myself. Why did I let him in? Why did I not ask him to leave? Why did I not fight harder? Why, again, did I not report it? Why? I blame myself. So the trauma was about, as it was with my mother, my failure, in this case, to protect myself. The failure with my mother was that I couldn't protect her. So that enhanced a feeling of, not just failure, but an inability to make things okay, to be safe, an inability to be safe, caused by myself.
You use this word reactive. You've used it a couple of times. And in a sense, it's like you were reactive to this incident, but it sort of floated you some way into the Hollywood world, and then you moved to LA and then found yourself in the thick of the center of it, but not through, it seems, any effort on your part. You just somehow got into the thick of it.
Well, when I was there, and I was Doug Netter, the man who I had begun an affair with when I was on the movie, and while I was still married, and who was much older than I was, I had this idea that I could become an actress, and it was very obvious. How it could not have been too obvious to him, I don't know. But that I was not an actress, and I never even thought I was particularly a good model. I was a bit self-conscious and shy, and didn't have that thing that good models have with the camera. And but I knew that again, I had no work experience. I hadn't been to college. I was then 21. I knew that I could model. I knew I could do that. So I went to an agency called A+ in Los Angeles, and they agreed to take me. And so that then, because it was a bigger market than, say, Chicago, where I had been working, I began to do more work and more prestigious work.
But I was going to step in with that concept of reactive too, Danielle. That caught my attention because, Susanna, a million girls, young women, could meet the people you met in the succession that you met them and not have been brought in on that level that you obviously are, but in those days, as someone who wasn't known, just one of these electric figures. There are just people that we meet in life that we're like, oh, she's special. I want to introduce her to this person, and that's going to go really well. And, you just were sort of there, but everybody was noticing something in you. It wouldn't have been any other girl that was asked to work at all of these things. Don't you think that it was something about you that everybody was recognizing that was not just the beauty?
It's hard for me to think that, but of course it was also circumstantial. That the fact that Connie had these two sons but never had a daughter, that we had obviously a mother-daughter relationship, and I was there 4 or 5, 6 nights a week. So in a way, people
Can you
had
explain
to.
who Connie was, just to people who wouldn't know?
Connie was perhaps the most sophisticated, most refined, most desired, in the sense of an invitation, hostess in Beverly Hills. And she'd been married to Jerry Wald, who had been a very successful and very good film producer and who had died young. So she was a widow. She had this wonderful house in Beverly Hills and these friends, and she gave dinners and often screenings after the dinners. And it was, people wanted to be there because they were all, she was very clever about mixing people to, unlike, say, the Bloomingdales or that Hollywood crowd that supported Ronald Reagan. She was not interested in that particularly. There were always artists, reporters, actors, of course, but you never quite knew who would be there, except that they were interesting.
You met her through your Kaiser benefactress, correct?
I had been very homesick for Hawaii, and I had been body surfing on the weekends at Topanga. There was a good beach for body surfing. And there was a young man there who also would body surf. And he asked me out a couple of times, and I said, no, I wasn't interested. And then he one day swam up to me in the water and said, would you have dinner with me and my mother? So I
forgotten that part.
Very good move.
Yeah, but see, this only happens to you when you body surf, you know?
Mother is the word, I guess I'm laughing because it hadn't occurred to me before. It's like the magic word. You want something from me, all you have to say is mother. So I said yes. And I, of course, had not heard of her and not anticipated what I was to find, even the first night when I went to dinner. And
that crowd, which you sort of delineate, and Caitlin, I mean, you're a sociologist of this, I think, of the different worlds of Hollywood. Like, as you say, I've always been fascinated by the Bloomingdales, Betsy Bloomingdale, Nancy Reagan, Chanel, Ladies Who Lunch set, and where they fit in. Then there's the sort of actors, there's the studios. So Connie, she was someone who sat in the middle of this and brought everybody together, and she knew Audrey. She introduced you to Audrey Hepburn.
I think she thought that group, the Republicans and the rich supporters of Reagan, what later came to be known as the kitchen cabinet. I think she thought she wasn't a gossip, and she wasn't didn't always say what she thought. You had to divine it, but I always felt she thought they were a little vulgar and not interested in intellectuals or writers or bohemians or outsiders. She or even maybe young people, because there were often other young people, not quite as young as I was, but young writers. And a lot of that had to do with Jerry Wald, because he introduced her to a lot of those people, the young writers in particular. So she was, had you heard of her, Caitlin?
I feel like the name rang a bell to me when you were describing her in the book, that somehow I've heard that name as a sort of a legendary sort of person and hostess at that time and place, but I didn't actually place her. Although the descriptions of those dinner parties, of course, you and Joan Didion are such closely connected people. And I know in the White Album, there's a description of a kind of dinner party, kind of a Bel Air dinner party that Joan Didion was describing as being a bit vulgar in a way, whereas you're describing Connie Wells' parties as being just non-vulgar in any way and just very refined.
Also, she was quite original. I mean, the women in that other world would be wearing galanos and have important jewels and their hair. I remember there was a hairdresser called Julius, who I think did Betsy at Bloomingdale's and other women's hair every morning. He made his rounds. But Connie, on the other hand, do you remember Mary Mecco prints?
Yes.
Of course.
She wore skirts made out of that with a cashmere sweater and a little
mod.
Yeah, and Kenneth Lane, fake, costume jewelry, and she was original. She just was. She had been a Claire McCardell model, who also was a rather original designer in the 40s and 50s, and she was quite beautiful, although she had snow white hair by the time I met her.
Can we just go through some of the names of people that you met and just give us your quick thoughts or descriptions of them?
Yeah.
One of them, and you would go on to marry this production designer, and thus lead you ever further into the Hollywood world and on movie sets and locations.
It was a different world.
Right.
Connie's world, very different.
But through these, you met these famous people. At Connie's, though, you met Audrey Hepburn several times.
Yes.
And what the story I found hilarious was the most important advice that would be life-changing, that she was going to give that to you.
Well, I almost took that out of the book because I didn't want to make myself sound superior, or that I was making fun of her, which of course I'm making fun of the situation. I'm making as much fun, I hope, it is evident, of my own eagerness to hear what she has to say. But I left it in. She was very sweet, very gentle, but she was not too smart. And she did say to me, I have something to tell you that will make all the difference in your life. And then forgot to tell me, was interrupted, couldn't. And I kept trying to meet her on the stairs, because I was there often during the day too. And she stayed there with Connie whenever she was in town. And then finally, she said to me, oh, yes, what you must always wear hose the same color as your shoes.
Your shoes.
And then off she went.
That is, to me, that is kind of life-changing. When you think about it, it's true.
Yes, especially not black tights with white shoes, or things that I might have done. I don't think I ever did that, but she did. It did make me stop to think, and I think of it now often when I'm getting dressed, and it makes me smile.
You also became close with the Didions, which is both how Caitlin and I had sort of heard about you and entered your universe a bit. I
met them the very first night I went to Connie's for dinner, and expecting it just to be Connie and her son, who had invited me. And they were there. He was very, very friendly.
This is Dominic Dunn.
Yes. No, not Dominic.
I'm sorry, John Dunn, yes.
And probably curious about who I was. He had that kind of curiosity, which she didn't really have. She was much more, I always thought of them too as like a good cop, bad cop routine. Because he could be outrageous. He was a gossip. He could be violent. He was very hot-tempered. And he was also very socially ambitious. And she was not like that at all. But I mean, it took me years to think, well, they're happy together. She must, unless she goes home every night and says to him, why did you, stop behaving like that? She obviously didn't. He obviously served a very important purpose in her life. He was the bad cop. So he and I, he was very friendly and funny and curious. And also they both she especially had a passion for Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And so that interested her. And she would ask me questions about that. And then we later knew people in common, people that I had known growing up. She later met when she went. Mm-hmm. And so that was another way that she was interested in me. But, again, when I was asked to go and stay at their house, there is an aspect of it which sounds maybe that I'm not taking full responsibility for my own part in it, but I was available. They had met me at Connie's quite a bit. They thought I was reliable, which I was. I was living someplace that I didn't like, and they needed someone to stay in their house. And why? Let's ask Susanna. Maybe she can do it. So a lot of it, and again, with going to dinner at the Waltz in the first place, Connie. Well, I can't say that she needed someone at the table because it was always busy, and as I said, I was there almost every night. But when I went to stay at their house, and then when they came home, they asked me to stay on. That was when our friendship became something more complex and more profound.
Mm-hmm.
And later, my sister.
But again, as far as so much about the calibrations of social class, there you were, on the one hand, rootless and available, and all these things, but on the other hand, to Punahou, you'd been raised in this very kind of formal society and yet very casual society. So you were at the country club with your father where a certain kind of dress was expected, but then being on the beach and swimming was very much part of it. So in a way, you were had a perfect combination of sort of traits and background for LA at that time, where there was still a very strong interest in people who had, had this kind of social class that they brought with them, unintentionally, just part of them. And also for people who could be more free and more loose and more bohemian. So you sort of were the perfect person for that time, don't you think, in that way?
Yes, I hadn't thought of it, but yes. And also I was quite bookish. I mean, not quite. I was very bookish. I mean, I was a bookworm and have been in childhood. So I had read most things they had read. We were reading the same new books. We could talk about it. So that was another connection, was book literature.
Mm-hmm.
I liked your description of Joan Didion, as you say, the sort of good cop, bad cop, but that she was, she used engraved stationery. She ran her house very meticulously. But then for breakfast, she would come down in dark glasses, open a fridge, and have Coke and salted almonds.
And a cigarette.
Bar nuts, a cigarette for breakfast.
And without, and wordless, without,
yeah.
I didn't even know if there was a good morning. Yeah.
And she was not liberal, you said, which was surprising.
No, she was an old-fashioned Republican, old-fashioned landed gentry Republican. She adored Barry Goldwater. And she didn't proffer these views because, of course, almost all of the people around her were very liberal, mm-hmm. John included. But it came from, I think, this deep sense she has of being a fourth or fifth generation Californian in a farming community. Her relatives were judges and lawyers, and it was an old-fashioned, again, social structure. Mm-hmm. She went to Cal. Of course, you would think she was liberal.
Cal in the 50s wasn't so liberal.
No, she was in a sorority.
I know, right?
I say,
but, one of the things that and you're her friend, so maybe you can comment to this, but I obviously you can, I can't, but I always think there's an aspect of Joan Didion that people don't take her seriously when she's writing over and over that I don't process experiences the same way. I don't hear things the same way. I'm a little remote. I'm a little reserved. That she has a very particular personality that people just sort of ignore when they read it. That she just really does have a very particular, finely tuned antenna and sense of self that that's kind of set her apart for her whole life in that way.
She describes in one essay, I can't remember, it's in my notebook somewhere, but that she feels about herself that she is almost autistic.
Yes, I remember that, exactly. Do you think that was an accurate kind of feeling for her to have?
No, she was. She was eccentric, withdrawn, moody, not particularly talkative. She's to this day, she's not very particularly revelatory. You have to anticipate a little bit. If you know her well, you know pretty much how she will react to things, but not always. She can surprise you. I remember the night that Obama won the first term, and everyone was so excited and happy. And I said something to her to the effect that he had eroticized the whole country, that everybody had fallen in love with him, including me. And she looked very skeptical, and she said, he's going to disappoint you, and he will disappoint everyone else. And I thought, oh, gosh.
Did she say why, or she just made that pronouncement?
No, just that it was inevitable, that you couldn't. She meant it in the larger political sense, the sense of realpolitik, that no politician with the expectations that we held for him would be able to satisfy us, gratify us, and which was in some ways true. But no one was thinking that way except Joan.
And she is a godparent along to your daughter, along with Roman Polanski, which is an odd combo.
It's a very odd combo. He and my daughter has only seen him, I think, twice in her grown-up life. The last time when she won the French prize at school, and she was in Paris for a few months as her prize. And I think, as I recall, he took her to the movies with his wife. But I think that's the only time she saw him since she was born. He was very close to her father, Dick Silbert, to whom I was married. And Dick had been with him when the news came in London that Sharon, who was almost 9 months pregnant, had been killed. And he and Dick returned to Los Angeles together. And because Roman couldn't live in that house, of course, he lived in Dick's little beach house. And I later lived there with them, which made for an interesting menage. But when Lulu was born years later, he said that he would like to make Roman the godfather because of what he had lost when Sharon was killed. So of course I said yes.
What do you think that has happened to him since? What are your feelings? Did you know him at that time to be involved with, I mean, obviously not at the time of his marriage, but post with young women?
Who knows at the time of his marriage. I did not know him when he raped the child, the 13-year-old girl. At the time I knew him, of course I knew like when Kosinski would be there, he and his friends, male friends, were interested in young women. I didn't know. They were never brought to the house. They were never at dinners or not. I mean, no, if I had ever seen him with a 13-year-old, I would have been appalled. And I think he always was that way, probably, but he got, what would be the word? Less, he was more cynical, more reckless, more egomaniacal, probably more famous, which was, I mean, there were always stories that the girl's mother had facilitated it a bit because he had promised that he was going to make the girl a star, which was why he needed to take photographs. I mean, I don't know if you have children, but it's very unlikely that a sensible mother would allow a 13-year-old girl to go and spend the afternoon alone with Roman Polanski.
Well, it's like those who seduced Michael, the parents of Michael Jackson's
yes.
young friends.
Greed and ambition.
They are seduced by fame and
Yeah, celebrity. Money. The hope of money.
But before you go, and then our listeners will just have to obviously go buy Miss Aluminum right away and read it, because we're not even scratching the surface of it. And it's not, and I also don't want to give the impression it's just like name dropping. It's these different worlds of Hollywood that you took us into, as you pointed out, that being on with your husband who was in production and going to movie sets was completely different from hanging out with Betsy Bloomingdale. And but you did sort of fall in, well, initially with Warren Beatty, who you seem to have had a purely professional relationship with, reading his scripts for him. But then you got kind of romantic with Jack Nicholson, and it was disappointing. Can you just tell us that story before you leave us?
Dick Silbert, to whom I was not married, but with whom I lived, was designing the sets for Carnal Knowledge, which was being directed by Mike, and Mike Nichols, and he had designed several movies for Mike, so they were close friends, and Mike depended on him. So I was with Dick in Vancouver, where the movie was shot, and I met on the set because I was always hesitant to go to the set to be the extra girl. I had that experience in Mexico when I was in that movie, and I saw what it's so interesting. There's so many little microcosms of social hierarchy. I saw it wasn't that cool to hang out on a set if you weren't working on the set. So I didn't like to go, but I was a bit lonely in Vancouver. And so I started going with Dick and tried to stay out of the way. And I met Jack and Art Garfunkel, who was also in the movie. And they had rented a house that had a swimming pool, and they encouraged me to use it when they were at work. And one day when I went swimming, they were there, and Jack was flirtatious and funny and naked, and I was shy and embarrassed and probably aroused. I wasn't conscious of it, but interested. And so I used to spend more and more time with him on the set. It was very chaste. I say in part because we were never alone and there was no way to be alone, but it was clear that something had happened between us, desire. And he asked me if I would become his script reader as a way to see one another when we returned to California. So I said, yes, of course. And so in order to see him alone, rather than take the scripts to the office, which would have been the customary routine, I met him at his house. He would pick me up. And we did become lovers. And there were many things that inhibited me. One, that the house was always full of people, because he was one of those actors who really, really likes an entourage.
I was fascinated by that. Well, the minute you wrote that, I thought, and you said Dean Martin did it, but Jack Nicholson, that people just needed people around them all the time.
Yes, and part of it, a lot of the people around them, with Dean, it was really fixers, someone to get girls, someone to cover up for girls, someone to get rid of girls, someone to get pills, someone, to deal with his kids. With Jack, it was a lot of young men his age who he had grown up with in New Jersey or met later in California. A lot of it was about drugs too, of course. But I always felt it was a way to hold on to what he thought, and I'm sure which were indeed his roots and his, he was being a good guy. He wasn't acting, again, another social world. He wasn't, he didn't patronize or neglect or reject the people he had grown up with. In other words, himself he had been in a working class Irish Catholic family in Neptune, New Jersey. So he was still, one of the boys. That inhibited me. And also I was so inexperienced. I was so dumb about sex. And what it was that was exciting, say, for him, or missed it completely. And eventually we stopped going upstairs after a few months. And the other thing that was rather touching about it was that perhaps one of the first times he asked me if I wanted to leave Dick Silbert and to come and live with him. And I said, no, that I didn't. And he was very relieved. You see, which, for a moment I thought, well, I don't want you to be that relieved. I also didn't want to.
Nor did you want to live with an entourage.
It was not a good idea. And also, I never took drugs.
Yeah, that's right. No, you didn't take drugs. You didn't. Well, I just feel there's so much to talk to you about. But Caitlin, you had said just before Susanna came on that you wanted her to write a sequel. I want you to write a sequel to this because I
hope you're at work on it, because I got to the end and I was like, I want to find out how she became a writer,
right.
what it was
you didn't
like
even get
being
into
a mother.
That. Yeah.
No, I left all of that out on purpose. There were two things I wanted. I didn't want it to be how I became a writer, because I thought that was a little too expected, too commonplace. And I also was very adamant with myself that it not be a book about, triumph over adversity. I thought, no.
Well, and it's really it's spellbinding, and it's just so how it goes back and forth. Your mother is like a character, but we never really know her, which is in a way must be how you feel, having lost her so young, and the flashbacks to Hawaii, and then just this observer of that world is so fascinating, and just such a great book. And and we've got a summer before us, probably going to be quarantined a lot. So we have 7 novels of yours now to.
Yes, we have to have a Susanna Moore reading circle now, so we can read everything.
Right. Okay, so it looks like we lost Caitlin to audio and Zoom issues, but it's just been wonderful to meet you virtually, Susanna. And yes, we don't mind if you write a sequel that also talks about you becoming a writer, because that after this years of what you say reactive, that you did at some point decide to take charge of your life and your writing, and you sort of hint that at the end where I won't go into it so people can read it, but becoming your own woman. And that is, I appreciate you don't want the cliches of triumph over adversity, but it's the way you write is so beautiful, and it is certainly a story I want to keep going. I want to hear more.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It wasn't easy, and that was the first step.
Yeah.
The end of Miss Aluminum, the book, but I got there eventually.
Yeah.
I did get there.
Well, thank you. And stay safe, stay well, and enjoy Martha's Vineyard. Well, I'm sorry we lost Caitlin at the last minute there. That's podcasting in the time of pandemics. You're reliant on people's Wi-Fi, but I did catch up with her after. So just so you know, her house hasn't been raided by rioters or anything. She's all fine. But anyway, that was fascinating and a great diversion to have Susanna on. Please buy her book, Miss Aluminum, because it's just so interesting, and it's incredible how she just fell into these situations with people that are so fascinating. I mean, who meets the son of an incredibly important Beverly Hills socialite while body surfing at Topanga? So it's that kind of wonderful memoir that's filled with surprises. This episode will end our season 7. We're going to take a couple weeks break and be back for season 8 for part of the summer. My usual co-splainer, Christina, has been taking a break from podcasting, but we'll be back soon when we resume with more great stories, femme-splainers, and much more in the new season. I have just this I feel very guilty. I have this pile of wonderful listener reaction and comments that I had planned to power through at the end of this, after the interview with Susanna. But I just feel that went on a long time and it was valuable, and I don't want to take up so much of your time. But I promise you that on the next episode, we'll leave a chunk because your observations are great. We love the feedback. We do have a special monthly episode for our subscribers at patreon.com/femsplainers and glow.com/femsplainers. If you love the show, please consider supporting us. Little as $1 a month. Everybody gets the bonus last call episode where you get to send questions to our guests. Different levels, you can get a ad-free podcast. And we really depend on your support, especially during these times. Where keeping these podcasting going is difficult. But anyway, thanks to you all for staying with us. Thanks to our audio editor, Nat who is going to be editing this in a motel room somewhere between here and here and Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles. He's driving across the country, so I'm sure he'll have tales. Maybe we'll pull him on to mansplain. But anyway, everybody, please stay safe, and we'll see you back very, very soon.